So as he said, I'm Theresa Miller. You can find me on Twitter as 24/7 IT Connect. And I'm going to focus on the Exchange Online piece of where we see the vision, where some of the issues are, and then how we can help. And I'll wrap it up with a demo. So Rawlinson talked a little bit about this higher level vision that we have. And in terms of our focus today with Exchange Online, I'm going to be talking in the context of the SaaS application, as all the email has been migrated already into the cloud. So all of your data is in Exchange Online at the point of this topic. And our focus, Exchange Online really is a cloud native app in the end, and so there's that emphasis as well. So when I think about Exchange Online and the data that the customer has put in Exchange Online, all of their email, I really think that the data, there's a shared responsibility there, and I'll explain that in greater depth. So let's start with the customer. Let's say you are the customer that's using this data. There are risks that you need to maintain when it comes to that data. You need to be able to recover from these risks if something happens to those very important email messages. So if we take a look, user error, that happens all the time. And as a former Exchange administrator myself, I helped many, many users try to recover their data. It happens all the time. Insider threats are also a really real issue. How the user or the employee manages their data can do some detrimental things to that data. From a security perspective, while Microsoft has some layers of protection in place for you, that doesn't mean that things like ransomware can't take a hold of your mailbox. That doesn't mean that phishing can't get through, and that doesn't mean that viruses can't get through. So if any of those things come into those mailboxes, you as the customer needs to be able to recover from that. And then the customer is also responsible for how the application is used. So if you have Outlook, you put guidelines in place in terms of how that's going to be managed. You probably aren't going to let your employees forward their mail, for example, to a personal mailbox. That is all the responsibility of the customer. Now, the SaaS provider does have some responsibility for that data here as well, and most of that comes in the form of high availability. So infrastructure failures, application failures, so like if the web servers go down, Microsoft is going to take care of that for you. You're not. And even disasters. If there's any form of a disaster with Exchange Online, all of that happens behind the scenes. Microsoft is taking care of it for you. So that's what I mean by when I say data protection actually comes in two forms. Then when it comes to the actual technical piece, there are some limitations there as well. So when you delete a mailbox, or if you delete a user account that had a mailbox, that data by default, if you've done nothing else, will disappear after 30 days. And some customers try to put workflows in place that help with that by, say, for example, reaching out to a manager ahead of time to say, are you going to need this information? And if they say no, 30 days goes by, and then they change their mind, it's potentially too late. That's not how we treated our data when it was on-prem. I always like to make that correlation as well. We had better fail-safes in place to make sure we could get that data back. Then there's the deleted item recovery. So that's like the second stage recycle bin where you can go back and pull messages that were deleted out. By default, you're going to get 14 days, but the max is 30. So an administrator can only go out and say 30 days. I know personally, in most organizations I ever did work for, they wanted 45 to 90 days recovery because it actually acted as a form of granular recovery if you wanted something pretty quickly. So limited flexibility, not the same as on-prem. Some companies do use some of the other features within Exchange Online to try and retain their data a little bit longer. Litigation hold is one of them. which can turn a mailbox into an inactive mailbox, which actually saves the customer some money. They don't have to pay for a license. But in my mind, litigation hold really is for compliance. I mean, there really should be a legal problem that you're trying to retain that data for. And then the other option is retention policy. Retention policy is a little bit more granular than just saying, I want to keep the whole mailbox. You can pick and choose what you want out of there. But in order to get that data back, you do need to leverage the e-discovery. It's the Search and Compliance Center within the Exchange Online. Actually, it's within the overall Office 365 platform. You have to go into e-discovery. Now, in terms of getting this information back, let's say as a customer you chose to just go with the native processes, this is where things can get complex and cumbersome. So one thing, litigation hold. There are a couple PowerShell commands that you can run that would allow you to get a mailbox back in a reasonable amount of time. But organizations need to take a look at who they want doing that work. Do you want a power user doing it, or do you want your high paid level admin doing it? So that's one of the considerations to me there. I mentioned that search and compliance console with the e-discovery. You can, through the GUI, set up a new case. You can work through the entire process, put things on hold, and you can do searches. The step is a 10-step process if you take a look at what's available online. And when you're done, you're left with a PST file to work with. It's not in the actual mailbox you wanted it to go into. So once you have your PST file, then you have to figure out where to put it. The other thing in my experiences with using the Search and Compliance console is that sometimes these discoveries take hours, and sometimes they don't even give me the results that I wanted, and I have to start over. So kind of some unnecessary complexity. So this is where Cohesity fits into the picture and some of the advantages that we offer. So as you can see, it would actually be on your left, my right. What we have is we have the cloud, and then we have two Cohesities. So one is on-prem and one is in the cloud. So one of the benefits that we offer customers is that they can actually back up their Exchange Online data to an on-prem device or a cloud device, giving them some flexibility to try things out. We do have many customers that start on-prem, so this gives them the option to back up that cloud data if they're not quite ready to go full cloud from the Cohesity side. We can manage backups, 10,000 plus backups, or I'm sorry, mailboxes is very easy for us to work with. We do have our global search capabilities where data comes back very, very quickly. You find what you need in a very expedited fashion, whether it's mailboxes or individual items. Our process is simple. As I mentioned, I'll do a demo actually next, and I'll show you that. And then in terms of how we do pricing, first of all, we deduplicate all of the data, whether you're in the on-prem or cloud edition. And then we do subscription-based pricing. So basically, it's storage-based. A lot of companies in the space of backing up mailboxes, they want to charge you per mailbox. For us, it just comes down to the storage you're using.
Yes. Is the Data Protect platform, if you run that in the cloud, is it a prerequisite that you've got an on-prem deployment?
Absolutely not. You can, if you just have Office 365 or maybe you have Azure, you can run our cloud edition, and you do not have to have had the on-prem.
And is that licensing you talked about, whether it's sort of consumption-based, does that differ for the cloud version? Because I'm having to kind of pay for blob storage underneath that, or how does that work compared to the on-prem?
They're the same. So it's all storage based. It's not going to be mailbox based.
I think
Does that answer your question?
Different question.
Are you also paying for the blob storage to Microsoft in addition to the capacity licensing that you're paying to Cohesity?
Okay.
I just quickly introducing myself. I'm Sai Mukundan. I'm in the product management team here at Cohesity. So to your specific question, Chris, the The licensing for our cloud edition is based off of the capacity that is needed in the cloud, and then you pay for, or the customer pays for the Azure resources separately. So in this case, if they're consuming blob storage, page blobs, Azure Compute, those are some things that the customer will pay directly to Azure.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yeah.
Was your concern against paying after payment else? You're going to pay that?
Yeah, as long as it's clear. But I guess because you're paying also on-prem, you're paying for that platform and the hardware appliance. So obviously, I don't necessarily want to know like exact costs, but there's a difference in costs between the two. Because on-prem, I'm paying per storage consumption, but I've got everything I need in there. Whereas in the cloud, I'm paying for your product, and then I'm having to pay for the infrastructure, the storage it's using underneath as well.
Even in the on-prem case, you are in essence paying for the infrastructure underneath, right? It can be Cohesity gear, but it can also be other gear. We support HP, Cisco UCS. So in essence, you have invested some amount of CapEx for that. It just turns out that in the cloud, it's more of a scale up or scale down model. So if you actually decide to scale down as your capacity needs change, then your Azure resources that you use for compute and storage will go down.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. Okay. So I'm not necessarily aware with the options with your platform on-prem. So that makes it clear where you're saying there's different deployment options on-prem. So you're making different decisions there around the cost and the hardware you want to use. And then it's just the same in the cloud, that different model. Okay.
I have a question about the blob storage.
Okay.
Is the blob storage, are you able to take advantage of tiering within the blob storage to move it from the hot to the cool to archive storage, depending on the age of the backup?
Yeah, so we support different Azure blob tiers.
Okay.
So you mentioned hot, cool, and archive.
Mm-hmm.
So archive is not something that we recommend from a tiering perspective, just because if you look at the SLAs on archive, the time it takes to retrieve data from Azure Archive is typically longer than the hot and cool blobs. So if it's tiering, we recommend hot or cool. If it happens to be more for long-term retention, then certainly Azure Archive is an option.
Okay. And so the slide is referencing Office 365 as a backup source, but we're talking specifically about Exchange Online. So are other services in Office 365 supported, or is it just Exchange Online today?
Yeah, so not yet. Roadmapped and coming. So we're in the near term, OneDrive and SharePoint will be also offered.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm an Office 365 customer, but my cloud sort of IaaS platform of choice is AWS, can I put the data platform in AWS and connect to Office 365, or is there a specific reliance on putting it in Azure and using blob storage?
So our platform itself runs on all three clouds. So the same cloud edition can run on AWS and on GCP, as a matter of fact. Now, technically it is possible, but I can tell you that most of our customers, don't tend to do that, because if they're using Office 365, they probably already have an EA with Microsoft, and so that there's a greater reliance on putting the data in Azure as opposed to taking it to AWS.
So
and then you have to deal with
this architecture here is a kind of a recommendation for those reasons, but it's not a hard dependency on Azure blob storage to be able to back up Office.
That's correct.
Yeah.
If I could just follow up, in AWS, the backend store is S3, or what is the backend store if you were to take that option Chris is talking about?
Yeah, so the cloud edition itself broadly requires compute and storage, right? On the storage side, for the platform to run, we use in AWS case the EBS volumes. So there's the ST1 and I believe the GP2 volume types that we use, and then excuse me, the data can tier to the likes of S3 or even S3IA, as a matter of fact. So the reason we use those EBS volumes is the platform requires a certain amount of performance capabilities from the underlying infrastructure, right? In this case, the storage. So hence the reason to use a certain amount of EBS, but then there can be a larger backend of S3 supporting that.
So just a couple things there. Sorry, there's a lot of different questions. The first being that Cloud Edition versus on-prem Cohesity, the cluster, unlike other vendors, the cluster capabilities in the cloud and on-prem are exactly the same. It doesn't matter. And whether you're in the cloud talking to something on-prem or vice versa, or across different clouds to the kind of AWS Azure question, as long as we have a network path to those resources, you can register them, you can interact with them. There's no limitations there, essentially. So that's kind of the first point. The second one on tiering, because tiering can be interpreted a couple different ways, right? So what Sai was kind of addressing was tiering the active file system into the cloud, where you want that to be on decent performing storage like S3, right? Or like a Azure Hot Blob, for example. The other kind of tiering would be using native cloud lifecycle policies to destage data from those tiers. That's also something we can support. It's just that obviously if you were to destage something to like Glacier, that's going to have a performance implication when we go request that data from, say, S3 bucket, right? That's it. I'm out.
Yeah, I was going to mention the performance as well. Anytime I think you're storing that data away from Azure or the Microsoft stack, you do have to consider how that affects your RPOs and RTOs of being able to recover that data. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into the demo here. All right, so a couple things that I think are important to get started. One is just to show you how simple it is to actually add Office 365 to our platform. So basically I go to Protection and choose Sources, and you can see that I have our Office 365 account in here. Now, if I were to register a new source and choose Office 365, it's as simple as having a global administrator account and a password to get that registered. Beyond that, there are about a handful of steps just to make sure that you can get the granular level recovery in place, where some permissions are required to complete the process. So, but the registration is really this simple.
May I ask a question or two about that at this point? So what you're doing is you are registering a service principal for your domain in the Azure AD domain that's got the global administrator associated with the .on Microsoft domain. Is that how it works?
Yeah, essentially your Azure tenant usually comes with Office 365. Yeah, you're just authenticating back to your global administrator in Office 365.
Yeah, and allowing you to register as a multi-tenant.
Correct, and registering it as a source. Yep.
Does that mean that the backed up data is in your tenant, or is it stored in our tenant? I may be misunderstanding something here. Is it in the owner's tenant, or is it in the tenant, your tenant's application?
So the actual backup would be stored in the Cohesity Cloud Edition. So wherever you have that data is where it would be backed up. Or if it was on-prem, then the backup would be stored on-prem. Or if you put it in AWS, then it would be stored in the Cloud Edition.
I'm just asking
for
about the
AWS.
Cloud Edition. You know what I'm asking?
You're talking about a multi-tenant app.
Yes. Well, I'm asking if they register.
I think what's happening here is by providing the global admin credentials, it creates a SPN within the tenant that you're specifying, and then that is the service principal under which the backups are happening, going to an Azure target or any target.
That's in your tenant.
Any target wherever you set up that Cohesity cluster. So that the linkage breaks there. It's not Azure AD managing the Cohesity component of it.
Okay.
I see where you're going.
Yeah.
If it was a SaaS service, then you would need to link the two.
Okay. So the next thing that needs to be in place is you have to have a policy. So we do have our policy manager, and this is where the customer would come in and decide if they want one of our out-of-box SLAs. So we do have gold, like backup every 4 hours, retained for 7 days. We have the silver and bronze, or you can create your own policy as a customer and then put whatever retention you want in place. And then the final step for backup would be that you'd have a protection job. And you can see here that I have a protection job for Office 365. And actually, what I'd like to actually show you here is if I go into a job, I can actually see all of the mailboxes that were backing it up, or that we're backing up. So once that's all in place, then a recovery can happen. So to do a recovery, I'm going to go ahead and go to protection and choose recovery. And the very first recovery type is that I'm going to do a mailbox recovery, but I'm going to redirect it so that it actually gets put into my mailbox, just so that I have the ability to review the data. So in that case, I'll go to recover and choose Office 365. And because John is in the room, my friend John, who's on my team, if I'm going to pick on him, I'm going to do it transparently. He's going to know I'm doing it. So we're going to go ahead and choose John, and I'm going to continue. And then when I'm in here, I'm going to choose an alternate location. And essentially, you'll see me pick my mailbox. And we'll go ahead and start the recovery.
Can you put any type of kind of approval workflow on there? So if someone's just recovering mailboxes, it has to go to a data protection officer or the line manager of that person or something like that?
I'm not aware of us being able to do that. Does anyone else have any?
Personally, I would think not necessarily natively, but that's where then you can integrate into things like maybe a ServiceNow type of workflow or
because it's a problem of any backup solution. Like you're kind of taking the data out of the privileges and stuff it had in the native environment of who can access that person's mailbox. So respecting those privileges or having some kind of protection is important.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because otherwise, your backup administrators can read anyone's email.
I mean, any one of those functions are traceable within our system. And it's a matter of an API call or a function to actually pull it out. So we would be able to do something like that with integrating it with another sort of component.
Like ServiceNow or something,
Yeah.
where you have a workflow.
And we do have integration with that already, so it's something that's very possible.
And I guess the actions you're taking here are outputted in terms of auditing as well, so you can see that someone had recovered a mailbox.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
Okay, so this is going to take a little bit to run. It's not going to take 12 minutes, but it'll take a few. So I'm going to start the granular recovery while we're waiting for this to finish, okay? So again, back in recovery, I'm going to choose recover, Office 365. And in this case, I'm going to just go with emails. We do have the ability today to do from, to, subject. We can put a date range on it. You could do a folder name. We could do emails with attachments only, or we could even do folders. I'm going to go ahead and just type in the subject of test, and I'm going to click a search. Now I happen to know, because again I'm picking on John today, that at the end of my search I'm going to find a message from John that I'm going to recover. So I'm choosing that. I'm going to click continue. And then I'm going to go in here and choose my tenant. Again, I'm going to put it in my mailbox for review purposes. And then I'm going to start the recovery. All right, so if we go back, we can see our recoveries are running. The mailbox recovery is just about done, and this one is kicked off. If I go over to my mailbox, I have to figure out which screen that's in. We're going to see that objects are starting to form based on those recoveries, but it won't be here in its entirety until those actually finish. I'll do a quick refresh just to make sure, but they're starting to fill in. Let me go back and check on that. Okay, so the full mailbox recovery is done. I'll just give it one more refresh. And so now I can snoop around John's email and see what he's been up to. So that's been completed, and I would expect that this other one is done or just about, yeah, pretty quick here. I'll just give it a refresh. And we can see the second recovery and drill into the email that I wanted, the test email. So it looks like you have a C. Colati folder, huh? So we get to pick on Chris a little too. So when you think about how to do these types of recoveries natively, and you look at how simple we make it, it saves a lot of steps. You can transition this work to your power users instead of having highly paid admins doing the job. So with that, I'm going to, do we have time for any last minute questions, or do we need to transition? Okay. I'll be around, so if any questions do come up, I'm more than happy to take those offline.
I just want to ask one though.
Oh, sure.
So what specific benefits do you have over a SaaS product? Why would I choose this over a SaaS product for backup?
Meaning like a third-party SaaS?
Look, I'm not going to pick on anyone in particular, but
Yeah.
there are a number of options here in this market. I just want to know, just quick bullet points. What benefits do I get over a SaaS product? Because I've had an additional overhead of managing Casey.
Yeah, so I think that, at least in our case, many of our customers are looking to do more data protection than just Office 365. So I know some of the products that you're probably are in mind, they specialize in Office 365, and that's all they'll sell you. So there's that piece. And I think our pricing is another huge value, because they will get you for every mailbox you add. We don't care how many mailboxes you have. We just care about the data. So you get the storage cost, but we deduplicate it all. So you're not paying for every single thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Is the UI scriptable? Do you have like a PowerShell module or
So do we have APIs?
Yes.
You guys can
a CLI or
can-
something like that?
Yeah, we
Well,
have
into-
REST APIs
Everything.
as well as a PowerShell module,
PowerShell module.
for everything you can do in
Ansible.
the interface.
The platform itself is a consumer of the APIs we have. So everything that's you can achieve through the UI, actually our management component, Helios, consumes everything based through APIs. So you can do it in the way that as you want to as well.